mentioned nations, but think of nations more as races. When you see verses like this where God is talking about reaching all the nations, he's talking about reaching every single race. In other words, even within one country on a map, there could be many races, especially in a place like Africa where one country could have many different tribes and many different races. God is saying not only is he going to reach that country on a map, he's going to reach every single group and every single race within that country. So that's just a really important thing we have to think about is God is out for everybody. He's out for the whole world. And we see that trend continuing to this very day, as I said, of God reaching people all around the world, and actually even here next door to us. There are so many people from different cultures here in the Bay Area. I would bet that we might have actually people from every single country on earth within 40 or 50 miles of here. That's actually a real possibility. So we have a very ripe mission field right here among us in the Bay Area, and that's something we can pray about and ask God to equip us to go out and reach them. We can have the next slide. So I want to ask you guys a couple of questions, and the first one is, what nations are near you? Some of us may be called to go overseas, and for those of you who have actually called, I do encourage you to keep praying about that. But for those for whom that is not your call, that is okay. Because as I said, the nations are right here next door to us. They're the next cubicle at work. And so I really want us to pray about what nations are near you. Do you have a coworker that's from a place that doesn't have the gospel and they don't even understand what it's about? I really want us to pray about and ask about how we can reach those people next to us, those neighbors, those coworkers, those friends from college. I think we have so many rich opportunities here in this area. So I just encourage you guys, next time you spend your time with God, ask him about that. Ask him who you can reach. Ask him who's next to you. It might even be someone you've never thought about before, but God can bring that to your mind if it's his plan to reach that person. We got a nice bullet here. And this is something I just said, but if you haven't asked, ask the question. I think we really need to just be bold and proactive as we go to God and ask him to use us to reach those around us. So next slide. So now that we've looked at this whole picture of missions from the Old Testament to the New Testament, and how God's heart throughout the whole Bible is reaching every race on earth, I want to transition that into a very specific example, which is me. And so I'd like to then tell my story of how I got into missions and whatnot. So this is actually my parents on top, and that's me on the bottom. That's when I was a little kid, a baby. I was born and raised in Lansing, Michigan, and I grew up going to church as far back as I can remember. I grew up in a Pentecostal church where people were very lively and getting the Holy Ghost and falling out and stuff. And I always asked my mom as a kid, since I was kind of a calm person, I wasn't really like that, I'd always ask my mom, what are they doing? Why are they acting so crazy? And she would say, when you get older, you'll understand. So now that I'm older, I think I understand for the most part. So that's kind of my background as far as spiritual. I got baptized when I was 13. And I remember the reason I got baptized is because our pastor was giving a sermon about the rapture, and I was scared about being left behind. So the fear tactic can work sometimes in certain cases. That's something you want to remember as part of your tool set you can use on certain people. So that's why I got baptized. But I've always had faith as far back as I can remember anyway. So that's kind of my spiritual story. And growing back up there in Michigan, there are two things that I loved a lot that I can remember. Go ahead, next slide. One of the things I loved the most was technology. I was really into computers, and the reason that started is middle school. We had our computer lab, and we played this game called Oregon Trail, which I'm sure some people in here remember. I see a couple of nods out there. And it was a game where you had to manage these settlers moving out west in the U.S., make sure that they didn't die. But it was supposed to teach kids about management and resources and whatnot. But I loved that game so much, and that really got me hooked on computers quite a bit. And so at that time, I decided that I was going to bug my mom like crazy to get us a computer at home. So that took us a few years, and she finally ended up doing that. And after she did, I proceeded to hog it all the time so my sisters could never use it. And so when I got that, I learned how to do my own programming, how to make web pages. And I also decided that no matter where I went to college, I wanted to study computer science, and I wanted to work with computers in some capacity. So that was a really big decision I made back in high school because I love technology so much. So that was just a huge passion I had. I can remember going back to 7th grade, and it kind of consumed me quite a bit in high school. And it actually was one of the major factors in deciding where I wanted to go to college also, which I'll talk about here in a second. So we have the next slide. Another thing I was really passionate about was Japan, which I know sounds kind of random, but I think I got into it through Japanese animation. And the first Japanese animation movie I can remember watching was this here. As you see on the right side of the slide, that motorcycle and the guy. This is a movie called Akira. It's about a high school kid in Japan who has super psychic powers so that whenever he thinks about anything, he can make it blow up. So the Japanese police, the Japanese military come after him, chasing him, trying to stop him, but they can't stop him, and the movie ends up with them blowing up the whole city of Tokyo, and that's it. So it's kind of a sad ending. But what I realized from this movie is that Japanese movies, much more so than American movies, are more comfortable with sad endings, because they believe that reflects the human life and human reality better. And so that was just an cultural insight I grabbed, and I kind of wanted to learn more about it. I thought it was really intriguing. So I started watching more Japanese animation movies, and I would watch them in Japanese with English subtitles, and as I heard the language, I thought it was so fascinating. It sounded like a neat language, and so I said, I think I want to learn a little bit of that on my own myself. I also love the characters too. I thought they were so complicated that there's no way anybody could possibly read and write those. So just to see if it was actually possible, I decided to see if I could do it myself. And so I went and got a Teach Yourself Japanese book at the bookstore, and I decided to start flipping through it. And I found that it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it quite a bit. So as I was doing this, I decided that no matter where I went to college, well, I was going to major in computer science. I wanted to minor in Japanese and also study abroad in Japan. So that was another really big decision I made in high school because I liked learning Japanese so much. So those are kind of the two big decisions there. I did end up going to, coming here to go to Stanford. I did major in computer science. And I took 2 years of Japanese and studied abroad in Japan. And while I studied abroad in Japan, it was a really fascinating experience. The first thing I was really shocked by is that when I spoke Japanese to actual real-life Japanese people, it actually worked. I couldn't do it. The reason this is so surprising is that you study for like physics or math and it's a really hard test. You can study forever, but once you take the test, you actually don't do that great. But when I was studying all my Japanese and I used it with real-life people, I found that it worked. So that was very encouraging to me. Oh, this is cool, it actually works. So that was just a neat thing. And another thing that made me want to dig in even deeper is that the Japanese people, if they see someone that looks like me, that looks like I shouldn't speak Japanese, but yet I speak it to them, they're so polite, so respectful, so encouraging, that it makes you want to dig in even more. So it creates this positive feedback loop where you keep digging in more and more and more. And that was just a very exciting thing for me. One of the experiences I had there is I did an internship with a Japanese company in Yokohama, Japan. And my company was all Japanese guys. I was the only foreigner there. And one tradition and custom that they had at this company is that every employee who had been there for less than 1 year had to take out everybody's garbage every day at 5:45. So we had to roll this garbage onto their desk, take their garbage can, dump it, roll it to the next desk, dump it, roll it to the next desk, dump it. And it was very humbling, I guess is one way you could say it. But it was a new experience for me, so I was just taking in the culture, and I said, okay, I'll take this, what I get. So I had no idea about missions whatsoever at that time. I just knew that I liked Japan a lot. But as I was doing this experience at this internship, I realized that every day after we took out the garbage and took it down to the first floor to dump it out, all the men would stand around and smoke. And while they're standing around and smoking, they decided who would get promoted, who would get to work on what project, and who would get assigned what customer. So it kind of dawned on me that if you're a man working in a Japanese company, if you didn't smoke, you probably were never going to get promoted. Here in Silicon Valley, we decide things at the meeting itself. But in Japanese companies that are very traditional companies especially, the meeting is just an afterthought. The real substance is decided when they're out drinking or out smoking before or after the meeting. And so that was just a real eye-opener for me as far as the culture goes, and I just thought it was a really neat learning experience. So anyway, that's just one of the many things that happened. I could go on for 8 hours telling you all about the stuff that happened there. But I ended up coming back from that experience. I graduated from college in 2001, and I started working here in Silicon Valley as a software engineer. I first worked for Symantec, and then I worked for Palm, working on the Palm Trio smartphone. Then I most recently worked for Apple, working on the iPhone. But right when I started working at Apple on the iPhone, something really interesting happened. We can have the next slide here. I took this class here at Abundant Life called Perspectives on the World Christian Movement. Some of you guys might have heard of it. It's a class about missions. It's offered once a week, and they have a different missionary speaker come in every week, and they teach you a lesson about history of missions or the biblical basis for missions or current practices of missions. But when I took that class, I didn't really know too much about missions, and so it was really an eye-opener for me, and it just really blew me away completely. Right around that time, I had been praying to God for a way to use my passions and my talents and my interests for Him, but I wasn't really getting any kind of answer, so I was kind of stuck a bit. When I took this class, it really resonated with me quite a bit. And I said, okay, missions, this sounds very interesting. How could I be involved in this? Well, I lived in Japan during college. I had studied Japanese already, and I was pretty much fluent in the language, so I already had that under my belt. So that decided the place. And of course, the need in Japan is extremely great. It's less than 1% Christian. So the need for the gospel, the need for workers to go there is really extreme. So that decided the place for me. But I didn't go to seminary or anything. My major was computer science. So I wanted to use my tech background for missions somehow. So after praying about it a lot and researching Japan online quite a bit, one of the things that I realized is that Japanese people are glued to their mobile phones all the time. Here in the US, we use the internet primarily on our computers. But in Japan, most people use the internet on their phones, not their computers. So what I really thought about and prayed with my small group about is that I would go to Japan and get the gospel online, especially through mobile phones, and work with churches to equip them with this kind of outreach. So that's the overall mission that I thought of when going to Japan. We got the next slide here. So I really